Leave is sought for that debate. Is there any objection?
Yes, there is.
Yes, there is. Order. I call on government orders of the day number 1 to 3.
Social Security, Benefit Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 2, Committee Stage continued. Local Electoral Amendment Bill number 2, Committee Stage.
I declare the House and Committee for consideration of the Social Security, Benefits Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill, for further consideration of the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 2, and for consideration of the Local Electoral Amendment Bill number 2.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
The House is in committee. Kia ora tātou no reira te whare, inga iwi, inga rio, inga hawe whad, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings, honourable members. The House is in committee for consideration of the Social Security, Benefit Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill, also for further consideration of the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 2, and further consideration of the Local Electoral Amendment Bill number 2. We first of all move to consideration of the Social Security Benefit Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill, and the question before the House is that Part 1 stand par. I call the Honourable Member Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the committee stages of the Social Security Benefit Categories and Work Focus Amendment Bill. Mr. Chair, we've made it very clear from the outset that Labor does not support this bill, but it was indeed our focus, our intention through the Select Committee stages to make the best of a bad lot, as it were, even though we were not in agreement with what the government's drivers were in respect to particular aspects, like, for instance, the punitive sanction-based nature of these changes. We did want to ensure that we could reduce down the negative impacts as much as we were able. So I want to speak to some of those changes today. Before I begin, I want to thank all of those who made submissions to this bill. It's fair to say that probably the most significant viewpoint that we heard just in terms of the size, the scale of submissions, were from those those parents in particular who wanted the ability to homeschool their children. That's something we'll probably each individually canvass when we talk about this bill. But it's fair to say, I think that the point that the Select Committee reached by adding in the ability within the bill, which technically is covered by Section 1A, which sets out the social obligations, but is also referenced later on in the bill, basically says that if you're able to get an exemption from the Ministry of Education to homeschool your children, that will then allow you to be exempt from being sanctioned by the Ministry of Social Development if they are not enrolled in school. My understanding is also if that parent is using the correspondence curriculum for early childhood education, then that will also have some application. It may need some clarification from the Minister on that, because whilst that's certainly my understanding that where an exemption allows that distance learning curriculum to be used, some of our submitters believe that that hasn't been the final outcome. Now, it probably would be very useful for us to clarify that here and now for those submitters, because I know this is an area they feel very, very passionate. So that's my understanding, that anyone who has that exemption, be it across early childhood education and the specific curriculum there for distance learning, or a exemption for for any other form of schooling, then that will apply for the purposes of work and income. That's a really important point to make, because I know all members of the Select Committee, I think that was a good outcome on that particular issue, and we want to make it very clear to submitters what the resolution was there. Coming back, though, Mr. Speaker, to some of the wider context of the bill, it's important for me, from Labour's perspective, to again reiterate that it's always been our belief that the social security system in New Zealand should be dignified, it should be active, and of course it should be work-focused for those who are able and in a position to be able to work. We hold some differences of opinion with the government as to whether or not that's actually what this bill achieves. Now, when you look at those criteria within the context of the environment we're in at the moment, the hundreds of 170,000 unemployed people seeking work, obviously it's a tough environment to be seeking work. And now, in our view, that means that we should be looking to ensure that our active social security system is focused on upskilling and less focused on being overly punitive for people who are trying to find work but are not having success in that search in this particular environment. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to touch on some of Part 1, specifically Sections 11E and 11H, which sets out the new pre-benefit activity requirements. Now, it's unfortunate that in this country there's probably an assumption that if you lose your job, you just walk into work and income, and from day one you're granted a benefit. That is not how it works. Of course, depending on the way that you lose your job, there may be a stand-down period. You will go through an extensive process with a work and income case manager, and you may be required to undertake pre-benefit activity. If you're in hardship, you can access emergency assistance directly, I should highlight that, but ultimately the majority of people will undergo some kind of pre-benefit activity. And this bill further clarifies the range of pre-benefit activity that can be required of those on job seeker support, sole parent support or an emergency benefit. Now, Mr. Speaker, some of our concerns, Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Jacinda Ardern.
Some of our concerns exist around the fact, Mr. Speaker, we've never really analysed to much of a degree how useful and how tailored some of this pre-benefit activity is. Let's be specific. In Clause 3, it states that it could include attending and participating in an employment-related seminar. That could be a CV writing course for a graduate. I've had graduates who have come into my office and said I was required to go on a long CV writing course. I already had a CV. I knew how to write a CV. I've been required to go on computing courses. I've just finished an honours degree. We must be more tailored in our approach to working alongside those job seekers to make sure that we're actually being useful in our engagement with them. None of that's really was discussed at the Select Committee. The pre-benefit activity, I have to say, is a broad brush approach and is being misused currently. A young person who wants to go on a benefit at the moment is being told by work and income brokers that they have to go on a limited service volunteers course. Now, technically, you could call that a pre-benefit activity, but it's not meant to be a compulsory course, Mr. Speaker, and yet I know of young people who have been told that if they don't, they won't access a benefit, and that is not right. Mr. Speaker, it may also require them to undergo any other course that work and income feels is necessary. Now, I know some of our job seekers, for instance, can't read or write, and yet work and income's contracting now with service providers means that some of those courses, which used to be quite lengthy courses, as you would expect for that degree of education, are now being chopped back to sometimes 6 to 12 weeks. You cannot make a real difference in someone's life like that with such short, sharp shocks, and yet that's some of the pre-benefit activity we're talking about. Our point, Mr. Speaker, is of course we want an active system, but make sure it's tailored to the individual and not the benefit category. Make sure it's not a course for a course's sake so you can fill in some kind of number and make everyone feel jolly that you're doing the right thing by someone. We've got to make sure that these are useful interventions, particularly when there are sanctions attached to the back of them. Mr. Speaker, there are also a number of changes around the benefit categories via this bill, which I'm sure a number of my colleagues will traverse today. They include the fact that anyone who is currently on an unemployment benefit, anyone who is currently on a sickness benefit, and anyone who is currently on a domestic purposes benefit with a child over the age of 14 will now go on to a job seeker benefit. Now, I can understand that this is a system at the moment that is overly complicated, that is difficult to administer, that could have used some simplification. But by creating broad benefit categories and then overlaying over top of those some quite crude rules about what you can and cannot do on those benefits, we again risk treating individuals as categories rather than tailoring our response to them, using the Minister's language rather than taking the truly individualised investment approach that she continually tells us about. Now, one of our biggest concerns is the limitations that now exist for people on JobSeeker to train and to educate themselves and get into a position of long-term sustainable employment. Now, I've raised in the House before concerns that, for instance, someone who wants to go on and do a longer-term course, say nursing, is now being told that they cannot engage in even part-time study because they must be available and ready for work. Now, not necessarily full-time work. I've had cases of individuals who have been told to stop studying so that they can become available for for part-time work, which would still render them reliant on the social security system. Now, if our goal ultimately, as a parliament, is to see people in sustainable, dignified, non-precarious work, then surely we should be setting people out on trajectories that allow them to get off the welfare system in the longer term, rather than the short-term approach that this bill, I am sad to say, further entrenches because of the oversimplification, the way we've lumped everyone in together into benefit categories. Mr. Speaker, the same could be said for now the lack of a true investment approach around particularly those who are seeking wellness to work. I mean specifically those who are currently on a sickness benefit, or those who might be on an invalid's benefit but are soon to move on to supported living payments. There will be a subset of people within the current invalid's benefit who will be job seekers, absolutely, who are looking for work. And we will draw on this a little bit further down the track, Mr. Speaker, around medical assessments.
I call the honourable member, Dr. Rajin Prasad.
Talking to part one of this bill, which really contains the nub of the government's arguments and